The first time Camille Blake ruined my life, she looked beautiful doing it, which honestly made everything worse. St. Harrington Academy was full of rich girls in navy blue blazers pretending they were future CEOs instead of emotionally unstable teenagers with family trauma and unlimited credit cards. Camille Blake ruled all of them. Not officially. Nobody voted for her. But people moved when Camille walked through hallways. Teachers became careful around her. Students lowered their voices. And if Camille Blake looked at you for too long, your entire week was usually ruined. Personally, I avoided eye contact for survival reasons. Unfortunately, God hated me. Miss Blake, your father is here. The courtyard went silent. Actually silent. Like somebody muted the entire school. I looked up from my physics notes just in time to see a black Bentley roll through the academy gates. Slow, smooth, expensive enough to solve most of my life problems. Around me, students immediately started pretending not to stare. They were failing badly. Because Richard Blake never came to school himself. Men like him paid assistants to handle inconvenience. Near the fountain, Camille leaned against her silver Lamborghini with sunglasses resting on top of her dark hair. Perfect blazer, perfect makeup, perfect expression of annoyance. "Why is my father here?" Madison asked beside her casually. Madison Laurent was the only person in school who spoke to Camille like a normal human being, probably because they had known each other since childhood. Camille glanced toward the Bentley once. "He's irritated." Madison sipped her coffee. "You failed calculus." "I failed emotionally." "You got 38, Camille shrugged slightly. "That sounds fixable." I made the mistake of laughing. Tiny sound, barely there. Still, Camille's head turned immediately. Her eyes landed directly on me across the courtyard. Cold, dark eyes, sharp enough to make my stomach tighten instantly. "Oh no, no, not today, please God, I had quizzes." "You?" Camille called calmly. My soul left my body. Students nearby immediately looked at me with visible sympathy, like I was a deer being noticed by a tiger. I swallowed once. "Yes. Did you laugh at me?" "No. Lie. Terrible lie." Camille stared at me for a long moment, then looked away like she had already decided something, which somehow felt worse. The Bentley door opened. Richard Blake stepped out, tailored charcoal suit, silver watch, expression unreadable. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Even Camille straightened slightly. Her father glanced once toward the Lamborghini, then held out his hand. The keys. Silence. Camille did not move. "Dad, the keys, Camille?" Madison slowly stepped backward. "Smart woman." Camille laughed once. Short, disbelieving. "You're joking." Richard Blake remained calm. "You failed 2 classes. One was math. You skipped tutoring. It was repetitive. You threw food at a teacher. She irritated me. The keys." Around us, students watched openly now. "Even pretended anymore." Camille looked humiliated. Not loudly. Camille never lost composure publicly, but I saw the tension in her jaw, the anger in her eyes. Slowly, she dropped the Lamborghini keys into her father's hand. Madison whispered, "Oh, she's going to kill somebody later." Wonderful. Hopefully not me. Then Richard Blake looked directly at me. My heartbeat stopped immediately. Alara Vale. Rich adults knowing my full name never led to joy. "Yes, sir?" "Principal Lane is expecting both of you." Camille frowned slightly. "What does she have to do with this?" Richard Blake adjusted his cuffs. "Miss Vale will be tutoring you." Silence. Camille stared at him, then at me, then back at him. "No." "Yes, I would rather fail. You already did." Madison choked on her coffee. "I considered fainting dramatically. Maybe if I collapsed hard enough, they would leave me out of this entire situation." Sadly, life remained cruel. Principal Lane's office smelled like expensive coffee and stress. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Camille sat across from the principal looking like she wanted the building to collapse. I stayed near the bookshelf quietly, far away from her, preferably forever. "Alara is top of her class," Principal Lane explained carefully. Camille looked bored. I don't need tutoring. You failed calculus. I disagree with numbers. Madison snorted softly from the corner couch. Camille ignored her. Richard Blake looked toward me instead. You'll report progress directly to me. Camille's gaze moved toward me slowly. Cold. Unreadable. If she talks too much, Camille said calmly, we'll have problems. My hands immediately started sweating. Fantastic. Exactly what every scholarship student needed. Threats from billionaire daughters. I nodded quickly. Camille watched me carefully for another second, then leaned back again. Principal Lane looked exhausted already. 3 tutoring sessions a week, Richard Blake said. Starting today, Miss Vale, you will be compensated well, thank you. Camille said nothing this time, which somehow felt more dangerous. The hallway outside the office was empty. Rain hammered softly against the academy windows while I walked toward my locker, trying very hard not to cry before lunch. Footsteps echoed behind me, steady, unhurried. Camille, of course. I kept walking faster. The footsteps sped up too. Wonderful. Maybe death was finally approaching. Before I reached the staircase, a hand slammed against the wall beside my head. I froze instantly. Camille stood terrifyingly close. Close enough that expensive perfume filled the air around me. My back touched the wall. Oh my God, this was how horror movies started. Camille looked down at me silently for a few seconds. Then, hey, tutor girl. My throat felt dry immediately. Yes? Don't you dare run your mouth to my father. Her voice stayed calm. That was the terrifying part. If you do, Camille continued softly, you'll regret existing. I stopped breathing briefly. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. My mother was struggling with hospital bills, and I was apparently being threatened by the human version of a black credit card. I won't, I said quickly. Camille tilted her head slightly. You won't? No. Good. Silence stretched. I stared very hard at the floor, mostly because making eye contact with Camille Blake felt medically irresponsible. Then she stepped back. 6 o'clock, she said. Don't be late, and walked away. Just like that, no shouting. No drama, just destruction and expensive perfume disappearing down the hallway. I stayed against the wall for several seconds after she left. My hands were shaking, actually shaking. I looked toward the ceiling slowly. Dear God, I whispered internally. I have always been a good person. Please remove this woman from my life. God ignored me completely. The Blake mansion looked less like a house and more like the type of place villains discussed world domination. Tall gates, marble floors, massive chandeliers, everything expensive enough to pay my mother's surgery bills 3 times over. I hated rich people immediately. A maid led me upstairs silently. Miss Blake is in the study. Of course she had a study. The room itself was enormous. Dark shelves, soft lighting, rain against giant windows. And in the middle of it, Camille sat lazily in a leather chair scrolling through her phone. Black sweater, hair slightly messy now, still terrifying. She didn't look up when I entered. You're 2 minutes late. I checked the clock instantly. I was early. What a liar. Sorry, humiliating. Camille finally looked up. Dark eyes moved over me slowly. Evaluating. Then, sit. I said immediately. Because survival instincts existed for a reason. Textbooks waited neatly on the table already. That surprised me slightly. Camille noticed. I'm not stupid. I didn't say you thought it. I decided silence was safest. For the next hour, Camille barely spoke, which somehow made everything more uncomfortable. The room stayed quiet except for rain and turning pages while I explained formulas nervously. Camille did not listen, which made it hard. She was on her phone throgout, occasionally staring at me long enough to make my heartbeat act stupid. At one point, she solved an equation wrong. I corrected it softly. Camille looked at me. What? You switched the numbers. Silence. Then she pushed the notebook back toward me. Fix it. I did immediately, because I enjoyed living. I looked down quickly before she noticed my hands shaking again. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside the study, Camille Blake sat across from me like a beautiful disaster I had somehow been trapped with. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely dreaded going to school the next morning. I cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes after getting home. Not loudly. Quietly. The humiliating kind of crying where you sit on the floor asking yourself how your life became this embarrassing. 1 minute, I was a normal scholarship student trying to survive senior year peacefully. The next, I was being threatened by a terrifying billionaire lesbian with anger issues. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. My mother noticed my swollen eyes during dinner. You had a hard day? No, lie. Terrible lie. But I couldn't exactly say. A rich girl with the emotional warmth of a sniper rifle threatened my existence today. So instead, I smiled weakly and ate instant noodles while internally planning Camille Blake's downfall. Not actual murder, obviously. Mostly emotional murder, like maybe she'd trip publicly one day or get attacked by geese, something healing. Unfortunately, even while imagining revenge, my hands still shook remembering the way Camille cornered me against that wall. That girl was terrifying. Not loud terrifying, quiet terrifying. The kind where she looked at you calmly while ruining your mental stability. I hated her. Deeply. Spiritually. Academically. And the worst part? I still had to see her tomorrow. I briefly considered transferring schools, then remembered we were poor. Tragic. The next morning, I stood outside St. Harrington Academy staring at the building like it personally betrayed me. You can do this, I whispered internally. No, I could not. Students flooded through the entrance laughing and talking while luxury cars lined the front courtyard. Somewhere inside that building existed Camille Blake, probably ruining somebody's life before first period. I adjusted my bag nervously and walked inside. Rule number 1 today, avoid Camille. Rule number 2, survive. Unfortunately, God remained my biggest enemy, because 5 minutes later, I accidentally walked directly into Camille Blake. My shoulder bumped hers lightly in the literature hallway. The second it happened, the corridor went silent, completely silent. Oh my God. No, please no. I stepped backward immediately. Sorry. Camille looked down at me slowly. Black blazer, silver jewelry, cold dark eyes. Around us, students started moving away carefully like civilians escaping a war zone. Nobody wanted to witness whatever happened next. Camille said nothing, which somehow made everything worse. Then she started walking toward me, once, twice, until my back touched the lockers behind me. My heartbeat became medically concerning. I stared at the floor immediately. Maybe if I avoided eye contact long enough, I'd survive. Look at me. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I lifted my head. Camille stood inches away now. Beautiful. Terrifying. Expression unreadable. You're tutoring me, she said quietly. Don't touch me again. I'm sorry. You should be wonderful. Fantastic. I loved starting mornings with fear-induced sweating. Camille stared at me another second. Then, punishment, I blinked nervously. What? You'll get my lunch. Silence. Surely not. Surely God would intervene eventually. Camille continued calmly, and snacks, my soul left my body. Students nearby started whispering immediately. Oh my God, she's dead. Camille has a new lapdog. That poor scholarship girl. I wish the floor would open and swallow me whole. Camille glanced toward the whispers once. Instant silence. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Madison appeared beside her holding iced coffee. Unlike everyone else in school, Madison looked completely relaxed around Camille. Probably because they'd been friends forever. Madison looked between us briefly, then sighed. You scared her again. Camille shrugged slightly. She'll survive. Madison looked at me sympathetically. I appreciated that deeply because nobody else at this school seemed interested in my survival. Camille adjusted her sleeve calmly. 12:30. Then she walked away. Just like that. The hallway slowly came back to life after she disappeared around the corner. Students stared at me openly now. Like I was already dead. Wonderful. A thrilling educational environment. By lunch, my humiliation had become public knowledge. Of course it had. St. Harrington Academy treated gossip like an Olympic sport. I stood in the cafeteria line clutching Camille's black credit card with sweaty hands. Actually sweaty. If I dropped this thing, I'd probably owe more money than my bloodline could produce. Behind me, 2 girls whispered loudly. That's her, the scholarship student? Camille's little assistant. I focused very hard on breathing normally. Maybe if I died peacefully, the embarrassment would stop. The cafeteria worker looked confused when I handed over the card. Miss Blake's order? I nodded weakly. 3 meals, extra fries, expensive drinks, snacks. Of course, Camille ate like a small dictatorship. I carried the tray carefully through the cafeteria. Every eye followed me. Actually, every eye. I used to be invisible here. Now I was apparently part of Camille Blake's social terrorism. Near the windows, Camille sat at her usual table. The atmosphere around her felt completely different from the rest of the cafeteria. Quiet, controlled. Nobody laughed too loudly nearby. Nobody interrupted her. Even teachers walking past seemed careful. Camille herself barely spoke. She sat lazily in her chair, scrolling through her phone while the rest of the table talked carefully around her. Like everyone waited for her reactions before speaking. Madison sat beside her eating chips peacefully. Honestly, Madison deserved financial compensation for surviving this friendship. I placed the tray carefully in front of Camille. She looked up once. You're late. The line was long. Camille stared at me silently. I immediately regretted speaking. Wonderful. I had survived 17 years only to die arguing over cafeteria timing. Sorry, I added quickly. Camille looked back at her phone. My entire body relaxed slightly, Madison noticed. Of course she did. You know, Madison said casually, people think she's blackmailing you. I almost choked on oxygen. Camille remained focused on her phone. Maybe I am. The table laughed nervously. Nervously. That was the thing about Camille. Nobody ever fully knew if she was joking. Madison looked toward me again. You don't have to stand there like a hostage. I sat carefully at the far edge of the table, as far from Camille as physically possible. Students across the cafeteria immediately started whispering louder. Oh my God, she's actually sitting there. Camille really hates her. I heard she threatened her. Correct. Very correct. Camille suddenly held out her empty drink without looking at me. Refill. I stared at the cup, then at her, then quietly took it, because survival mattered. Inside my head, however, I was fighting. Mentally, I was throwing chairs, setting fires, writing strongly worded emails. But externally, humiliating. Absolutely humiliating. Madison watched everything carefully, not laughing, just observing. Like she was trying to figure something out. Camille finally looked toward me again. Why are you shaking? My stomach dropped instantly. Oh God, she noticed. I'm not. You dropped the straw. I looked down. The straw actually had fallen from my hand. Wonderful. My dignity continued dying publicly. Sorry. Camille leaned back slightly, still watching me. You're scared of me. It wasn't a question. I immediately looked down again. Silence. The smart answer was probably no. Unfortunately, I had lost access to intelligent thought around this woman. So instead I whispered, no, lie, massive lie. Camille said nothing after that. Just kept looking at me for another second before returning to her phone. Madison slowly turned toward her, then toward me, then back toward Camille again. And for the first time, Madison looked genuinely interested. By Friday, I had developed a system. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with Camille Blake for longer than 3 seconds. And most importantly, never accidentally annoy her. Unfortunately, Camille seemed naturally annoyed by my existence, which felt deeply unfair considering I was suffering far more than she was. Coffee. I looked up immediately. Camille stood beside my locker holding out her empty cup. No greeting, no emotion, just quiet intimidation before 8 in the morning. Wonderful. I took the cup carefully. Okay. Camille watched me for a second. Then, 2 sugars like I was her employee. Actually, no. Employees got paid. I got emotional damage and heart problems. As I walked toward the cafeteria, I heard whispers immediately. There goes Camille's assistant. Poor girl. I heard Camille threatened her. Correct. Very correct. At this point, the entire school probably thought I was being held hostage. Honestly, not entirely inaccurate. That evening, rain hammered softly against the Blake mansion windows while I sat across from Camille in the giant study trying not to have a nervous breakdown. Again. The room smelled faintly like coffee and expensive books. Camille lounged lazily across the leather chair wearing all black like a villain attending a fashion show. Meanwhile, I was fighting for my life academically. "Can you focus?" I asked softly. Camille looked up from her phone. Silence. Then she returned to the screen. My eye twitched slightly. Wonderful. This was wonderful. I was risking hypertension for a girl who treated education like a personal attack. "Miss Blake," I tried again carefully. Nothing. I swallowed nervously. "Please, God, not today. I had already cried twice this week." Finally, very slowly, Camille looked up. "What?" My stomach tightened immediately. I need you to pay attention." Camille stared at me without expression. Then, no, silence. I looked down at the physics notes in front of me. Inside my head, however, oh my God, this woman is Satan. Externally, okay, humiliating. Camille leaned back in her chair slightly, watching me now, like she was waiting for something. Maybe fear, maybe panic, maybe entertainment. Honestly, probably all three. "You're sweating." I quickly wiped my hands against my skirt under the table. "I'm fine." "You're a bad liar." I focused harder on the textbook. "If you fail again," I said quietly, "Principal Lane might cancel my tutoring position." Camille said nothing. Softly against the giant windows, thunder rolled somewhere far outside. I tightened my grip on the pencil nervously. Then finally, very quietly, "I really need this job." The room went silent. Camille's eyes stayed on me, sharp, unreadable. I immediately regretted speaking. Wonderful. Now she knew I was desperate. A terrible business strategy, honestly. Camille slowly placed her phone on the table. "Continue," I blinked. "What? The lesson?" For a second, I genuinely thought I hallucinated. "You're listening?" Camille's expression remained blank. Alara. My heartbeat jumped slightly. It was the first time she had said my name without sounding threatening. "Continue." I nodded immediately. Yes. For the next 20 minutes, Camille actually listened. Not enthusiastically, not kindly, but she listened. Occasionally answering questions in that calm, low voice that made me nervous for reasons I deeply wished to ignore. At one point, she got an equation wrong. I carefully reached for the notebook. "You switched the signs." Camille looked down briefly, then handed me the pencil silently. I corrected the formula quickly. My hand brushed hers accidentally. I froze instantly. Oh God, please no. Camille looked at me slowly. I pulled my hand back so fast the pencil nearly fell. Sorry." Silence. Then, "You apologize too much?" I stared at the notebook. Inside my head, "Because you terrify me." Aloud, "Sorry?" Camille looked at me for another second, then leaned back again. Somewhere deep inside the mansion, thunder cracked loudly. I nearly jumped. Humiliating. Camille noticed obviously. Of course she did. "You're nervous." "No, lie. Terrible lie." Camille stared at me for a long moment, then suddenly the study door opened. Richard Blake walked in. I almost died instantly. "How is the tutoring going?" Before I could even breathe, Camille looked at me, not openly threatening. Worse, a reminder, quiet, cold, sharp. My stomach twisted immediately. I had a mother in the hospital, bills, scholarship requirements, a life that could collapse very easily. So despite the guilt crawling up my spine, I smiled nervously. "She's improving." Richard Blake looked pleased. "Good." Then he turned toward Camille. "You'll attend your test review tomorrow." Camille looked bored again. "Fine. Don't waste Miss Vale's time." Something unreadable crossed Camille's face briefly. Then, "I won't." Richard Blake nodded once and left the study. The second the door shut, silence returned instantly. My hands started shaking again. I hated this house, I hated this school, and I especially hated beautiful rich girls with psychological warfare hobbies. Camille leaned back slowly in her chair. "Why did you cover for me?" The question came suddenly, quietly. I stared at the notebook. Inside my head, answers screamed immediately. "Because I need this school. Because I can't survive enemies like you. Because girls like Camille Blake destroyed people casually. Because my mother needed surgery more than I needed pride." But aloud, "That's what you wanted." Camille watched me silently, then tilted her head slightly. "Smart girl," cold spread slowly down my spine. "You're learning." I gripped the pencil tighter. The room suddenly felt too warm, too quiet, too full of her. Camille studied me for another second, then finally looked back down at the textbook. "Continue." And somehow that scared me more than yelling would have. By the time tutoring ended, it was almost 10. The rain outside had become heavier. I packed my books quickly while Camille remained seated near the windows. Silent as always. I just wanted to leave peacefully. Maybe survive the weekend emotionally. As I reached the study door, Camille spoke again. "Alara." I stopped immediately, slowly turned around. Camille's dark eyes rested on me calmly. "Don't be late tomorrow." I nodded quickly. "I won't." Silence. Then, "You're scared every time I look at you." My throat tightened instantly. "Oh my God. Abort mission. Abort existence. I'm not." Lie. Huge lie. Camille stood slowly from her chair. My heartbeat immediately lost stability. She walked toward me quietly. No rush, no emotion, just confidence, until she stopped directly in front of me, too close. Again. My back nearly touched the door. "You're a terrible liar," Camille said softly. I stared at the floor instantly, because if I looked directly at her this close, my nervous system might genuinely collapse. Then after a second, Camille opened the study door herself. "Go home." I left so fast it was spiritually embarrassing. Behind me, I heard Madison laughing somewhere down the hallway. "Oh my God," she whispered dramatically. "She's traumatized." "Mind your business," Camille replied calmly. Madison kept laughing anyway. Honestly, I liked Madison. She felt like the only normal person trapped inside this terrifying rich people horror movie. If you are enjoying this story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, my darlings. It will mean everything to me. By Monday morning, I had accepted something deeply unfortunate. Camille Blake was going to kill me slowly, not physically, socially, emotionally, psychologically, and apparently now medically too. Because I woke up with cramps so painful, I genuinely considered dropping out of school and becoming a farmer somewhere isolated. Unfortunately, hospital bills existed. So there I was, alive against my will. I sat through first period gripping my desk so hard my fingers hurt. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck. Wonderful. Exactly how every girl dreamed of spending senior year. Across the classroom, Camille sat near the windows lazily spinning a pen between her fingers. Cold as usual, unreadable as usual, terrifying as usual. I avoided looking at her directly, mostly because surviving mattered. By lunch, the pain had become unbearable. Still, I stood in the cafeteria line holding Camille's black card like a depressed employee. 3 sandwiches, 2 drinks, extra fries, protein bars. Honestly, what did this woman even do all day to require this much food? Behind me, students whispered immediately. "There's Camille's lapdog. She looks exhausted." Camille's actually evil, correct. Very correct. I grabbed the tray carefully, then immediately regretted existing because a cramp hit so hard my knees nearly gave up on life. Oh my God. Not here. Not in public. I gripped the counter quietly. Breathe. Survive. Graduate. The cafeteria worker looked concerned. "You all right?" "Yes." Lie. Massive lie. I somehow carried the tray toward Camille's table without collapsing. Honestly, one of my greatest achievements. Camille looked up as I approached, then immediately frowned slightly. The tiniest expression change. Most people wouldn't notice it. Unfortunately, I had become professionally trained in Camille Blake facial analysis for survival purposes. I placed the tray down carefully. Sorry it took long. Camille's eyes stayed on me. You look sick. No. Lie again. At this point, I deserved prison for dishonesty. I sat quietly at the far edge of the table, trying very hard not to visibly die. Madison looked between us slowly, then toward me. Oh, my stomach tightened. Please no, not another public humiliation. Madison lowered her voice slightly. You're pale. I'm fine. Camille still hadn't touched her food. She just kept looking at me silently. That was the terrifying thing about her. Camille never needed many words. Her attention alone felt intense enough to cause health issues. Finally, she spoke. You're shaking. I quickly hid my hands under the table. I'm okay. Silence. Then Camille stood. The entire cafeteria immediately quieted slightly. Of course it did. Camille picked up her tray calmly. Get up. I blinked nervously. What? Now? Oh my God. Public execution finally arrived. Wonderful. I stood immediately. Mostly because self-preservation instincts existed for a reason. Camille started walking out of the cafeteria. Everyone stared at me expectantly, like they wanted to witness the bullying live. Madison sighed and grabbed Camille's untouched fries before following us. Honestly, Madison deserved compensation. The nurse's office was quiet except for rain tapping softly against the windows. I sat awkwardly on the small bed while the school nurse searched cabinets nearby. This was humiliating. Deeply humiliating. Camille stood near the doorway scrolling through her phone like she didn't personally drag me here against my will. Madison leaned against the wall eating fries peacefully. You could have just asked if she was okay, Madison muttered. Camille didn't look up. She said she was fine, because she's scared of you. Silence. The room suddenly felt awkward. I stared very hard at the floor. Camille slowly lifted her eyes toward Madison. Cold. Warning look. Madison raised both hands. What? I'm right. The nurse finally returned holding painkillers and a heating pad. These should help. I accepted them quietly. Tea, thank you. The nurse smiled sympathetically. Try to rest today. Rest. Funny concept. I still had tutoring later with the human embodiment of stress. Wonderful. The nurse left again after a few minutes. Silence settled over the room. Madison checked her phone, then sighed dramatically. I have debate practice. Nobody answered. Madison looked toward me briefly, then toward Camille. You better not terrorize her while she's dying. Camille ignored her completely. Madison shrugged. All right. Have fun emotionally repressing everything. Then she left. The second the door shut, the room became painfully quiet. I focused very hard on opening the medicine packet, mostly because looking at Camille felt dangerous. Then suddenly, a shadow stopped in front of me. I froze immediately. Camille stood there now, too close. Always too close. You should have stayed home. I stared down at the heating pad. I can't miss school. Why? Scholarship. Attendance requirements. Hospital bills. Life. But explaining my problems to Camille Blake sounded deeply humiliating. So instead, I'm fine. Silence. Then, you're stubborn. I blinked slightly. That almost sounded less cold. Almost. Camille reached down suddenly. I flinched immediately. Actually flinched. The movement escaped before I could stop it. Silence. Oh God. The room went still. Slowly, very slowly, Camille looked at me. Not angry. Something else. Unreadable. I wanted the floor to swallow me immediately. Humiliating. 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 Camille's hand remained frozen briefly near the bed before she calmly picked up the heating pad instead. You plugged it in wrong. My face burned instantly. Oh, wonderful. Now she probably thought I was pathetic. Camille plugged the cord into the wall silently, then placed the warm pad beside me. Use it? I nodded quickly. Okay. She stared at me for another second. Then you're sweating again. I wanted to transfer schools. Countries. Planets, maybe. I'm okay. "You're terrible at lying." Inside my head, I said, "And you're terrible for my blood pressure." But externally, I said nothing. Camille finally stepped back slightly, then looked toward my bag near the chair. "You still have tutoring tonight, not a question. A statement." Fear returned immediately. "Yes, you can barely stand. I'll still come." Camille watched me quietly. "Then, why?" "Because people like you ruin lives when they're angry. Trust me, I didn't say that out loud. I value breathing. I said I don't want problems." Silence. Something shifted very slightly in Camille's expression, tiny, almost invisible. Then she looked away. 6 o'clock, she said calmly. "Don't be late," and just like that, the cold Camille returned fully. Like the strange moment never happened at all. Honestly, that was somehow more terrifying. By Wednesday, I had become officially unemployable at St. Harrington Academy. Not academically, socially. Which was honestly worse, because apparently once Camille Blake started targeting you, people stopped seeing you as a normal human being and started seeing you as a public warning sign. Example, nobody sat beside me anymore unless absolutely necessary. If Camille entered a room while I was inside it, people immediately looked at me first. And yesterday, somebody in literature class actually whispered, "That poor girl," right in front of me, like I had already died. Honestly, fair enough. At lunch, I stood in the cafeteria line holding Camille's card while trying not to think about my ruined reputation again. 3 wraps, 2 iced coffees, protein bars, extra fries. How was one person consuming this much food and still looking like a runway model? Rich people truly live differently. Behind me, 2 girls giggled quietly. There she is, Camille's pet. I stared at the cashier very hard. Do not react. Do not cry. Do not commit crimes publicly. I grabbed the tray carefully and turned straight into Brianna Monroe. Coffee splashed down the front of my shirt instantly. Cold liquids soaked through my uniform. The cafeteria exploded into gasps. Silence followed immediately afterward. Brianna looked down at me, then smiled slowly. "Oh no," she said without sounding sorry at all. That slipped. My hands tightened around the tray automatically. Wonderful. Exactly what I needed. Public humiliation before noon. Again. Around us, students watched openly now. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Because this was Harrington, and rich girls treated embarrassment like entertainment. "I'm so sorry," Brianna continued sweetly. "You should probably be more careful," she said with a smirk on her face. She wanted to embarrass me. A poor scholarship student can't breathe. Lie. Obvious lie. My chest burned with humiliation. The worst part? I couldn't even fight back. Not here. Not in this school. Not when girls like Brianna had enough money and influence to destroy scholarship students recreationally. So instead, I lowered my eyes quietly. "It's okay." Inside my head, however, "I hope your eyebrows fall off permanently." Brianna smirked slightly. Then one of her friends laughed. Maybe Camille got bored of her already. More laughter. My throat tightened painfully. I hated this school. I hated rich people. And I especially hated the fact that my eyes were starting to sting. "Do not cry. Do not cry. Please God, not in front of these people." Then suddenly, the cafeteria went quiet. Not normal quiet. Scared quiet. Every instinct in my body tightened immediately. Oh no. Slowly, Brianna's expression changed. The confidence disappeared first, then the amusement, then color. I already knew. "Camille, of course." The room seemed colder suddenly. I looked up carefully. Camille stood a few feet away beside the cafeteria entrance. Black blazer, dark eyes, expression completely unreadable. Madison stood beside her holding chips. Even Madison looked slightly tired already. Nobody spoke. Camille looked at the coffee soaking through my uniform, then at Brianna. Silence stretched painfully. And somehow that silence felt worse than screaming would have. Finally, Camille walked forward slowly. Once, twice, until she stopped directly in front of Brianna. Brianna swallowed visibly. Interesting. Apparently, even rich girls feared Camille Blake. Good to know. Camille's voice stayed calm when she finally spoke. "What happened?" Nobody answered immediately. Brianna forced a laugh. It was an accident. Camille looked at her silently, the kind of silence that made your organs nervous. Then, do it again. The cafeteria froze. Brianna blinked. What? Camille tilted her head slightly. You heard me? Madison sighed softly beside her. Oh, this is getting ugly. Camille picked up a full bottle of water from a nearby table, then calmly handed it to Brianna. Pour it on her again. My stomach dropped instantly. Oh my God. This woman was insane. Brianna looked confused now. Camille, I do it, still calm, still emotionless, which somehow made it terrifying. Brianna laughed nervously. I'm not doing that. Camille looked at her for another long second. Wait. Pause. Pause. Did Camille Blake just tell Brianna to pour water on me? Did she actually just do that? Okay, I need everyone to calm down, including me. Especially me, because for one tiny embarrassing second, I thought she was saving me. I thought, maybe she was finally, but no. Girls like Camille Blake do not save people like me. They humiliate them in new and creative ways instead, right? I genuinely do not know anymore, and that might be the most terrifying thing that has happened to me in this entire story, which is saying a lot because a lot has happened. So here's where we are. Camille Blake told Brianna to pour water on me. Whether that was cruelty or something else entirely, we will find out in part 2. And I need you to be there. So if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Right now. Turn on your notifications so you do not miss it the second it drops. Because trust me, you do not want to find out what Camille Blake meant from someone else's comments. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs a good story in their life. And thank you, genuinely, for watching until the end. Stay safe, and I will see you in part 2.